Good evening and welcome to Primetime News on TV1. For the Newsfirst team, I'm Mazra Hassan. Let's start off with a look at your headlines for tonight.
President instructs authorities to vaccinate everyone above the age of 30 in the Western Province before the end of this month. Ajit Niwad Khabral says Sri Lanka's sovereignty will not be betrayed for GSP Plus status. Government informs the European Union of the steps taken to evaluate the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Court refuses to issue injunction order against MTV Channel Private Limited as requested by Dilip Jayavira and George Stewart Health Private Limited. The responsibility vested with media to report facts pertaining to public health in a critical and just manner is inalienable, says Colombo District Judge. WM Mendes and Company Limited, owned by Arjun Aloysius, permitted to restart operations.
Development activities such as the commencement of work on the Maritime Facilitation Centre and Kapudu interchange on the Southern Expressway and the Gattabay underpass in Peradeniya were vested with the public today in accordance with the Vistas of Prosperity and Splendour policy statement.
The ceremony was held with the participation of many MPs, ministers and state officials adhering to health guidelines issued by the Ministry of Health. The Maritime Facilitation Centre, which is proposed to be constructed in 2 years, has an estimated cost of 4.9 billion rupees. The building, that consists of 17 stories, will be constructed on a plot of land owned by the Sri Lanka Ports Authority on the Lotus Road in Colombo. Meanwhile, the Gattabay underpass in Peradeniya, which saw the conclusion of construction at 127 million rupees, was virtually declared open by Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. The Prime Minister also declared open the Kapudu interchange on the Southern Expressway, which was completed at a cost of 445 million rupees. The Kapudu interchange is located at the 130-kilometer mile post on the Southern Expressway. We never said that we are finding it difficult to develop the country. Our president, who spoke only twice in 2 years, had to speak for 60 minutes to address one issue. This government will continue its journey, no matter what. Some people of the opposition criticize the development activities we carry out. They ask us to wait until the pandemic is over. They ask us not to construct roads. Whether these are honest opinions that are being made, only the intelligent populace of this country will understand. This government has spent 262 billion rupees to curb the COVID-19 pandemic. We take all these steps to safeguard the people of this country. If we had stopped everything, blaming it on the pandemic, the people will have to suffer more. We have to protect our people. But to do so, we need the strength of the people as well. We can achieve anything as long as we are united.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa instructed health authorities to complete COVID-19 vaccination of all citizens above the years of 30 within Western Province by the 31st of July.
The President had given the instructions at the COVID Suppression Special Committee meeting where vaccination and future operations were discussed. At present, 60% of this age group in the Colombo district, 47% in Gampaha and 34% in Kalutara have been administered with the first dose of the vaccine. With the inoculation process commencing at hospitals from Monday, a considerable amount of people were given the vaccine during a short span of time. Steps have been taken to continue the method throughout the island. The President expressed confidence that Sri Lanka would soon receive the required amount of AstraZeneca vaccines for the second dose. Specialist Dr. Prasanna Gunasena, member of the Special Committee on COVID-19 Control, pointed out that the World Health Organization has recommended that a person who has received the first dose of AstraZeneca vaccine can receive the second dose within a period of up to 45 weeks.
A consignment of 1 million doses of the Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccine arrived in the island earlier this morning. The consignment arrived in a Sri Lankan airplane that departed from China. The epidemiology unit of the Ministry of Health confirmed that as of yesterday, 1,849,565 people have been administered the first dose of the Sinopharm vaccine, while 750,572 have been fully vaccinated with both doses of the vaccine. The World Health Organization has informed that it would provide 264,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. They have provided in writing that they would provide it in July. We have received directives to administer Moderna if we do not receive AstraZeneca.
The trade union action launched by 3 nurses' trade unions was called off a short while ago. However, operations at many hospitals across the island were hampered owing to the trade union action.
Among the main demands of the nursing staff are the 15,000 overnight travel and accident allowance promised to them in 2015, promotions and converting nursing colleges into universities. Operations at many hospitals across the country were hampered today due to the trade union action. This was the manner in which a large number of patients who arrived at the General Hospital in Kandy were severely inconvenienced today. Many units, including orthopedic clinics, were inactive due to the trade union action.
පාන්දර ඉඳලා ඇවිල්ලා මේ ඉඳගෙන ඉන්නවා පැය ගානක් තිස්සේ අපි ලෙඩුනේ.
වයිෆ් නවත්තන්න තමයි ආවේ. තාම ඉතින් මෙයාලා පොඩ්ඩක් ඉන්ටින්ට කියනවා. ඒකයි පොඩ්ඩක් බලන්න ඉන්නේ. කුලියට කරන්නේ ඒකත් නවත්තලා දාලා මේ එක්කරන් ආවා.
අපි විදිහට දුක තමයි මේ. ඉස්සරම ඇහුවා සනීපද කියලා. සැපද කියලා. දැන් සැපත් ඉවරයි සනීපත් ඉවරයි. පිටාල් තියෙන අහිංසක මිනිස්සුන්වත් කරගන්න බැරි. ඒකට වඩා විකලාංග. අපි කියන්නේ හිතන්න ඕනේ.
Meanwhile, doctors at the General Hospital in Ampara had to perform nursing duties today. According to our correspondent, the operations at outpatient department and clinics were carried out in a manner that did not inconvenience the patients who arrived at the hospital to receive treatment. Patients who came to obtain clinical services at the Colombo Teaching Hospital were severely impacted today. Patients who came to the maternal and cardiovascular clinics at the Anuradhapura Teaching Hospital were severely inconvenienced as well. Clinical services were carried out by doctors and minor staff at the Nuwara District Hospital. Nurses attached to units apart from the emergency treatment unit abstained from their duties at the Gampaha District General Hospital. The trade union action was in effect at the Gampaha District General Hospital, Karapitiya Teaching Hospital, Kurunagala Teaching Hospital and the Mavanala Base Hospital. The most severe impact was borne by the clinical units at those hospitals. Not a large number of patients were present for the daily clinics at the Colombo Eye Hospital today. However, the trade union action launched by the nurses was in effect.
What is the impact of the Indian Delta variant? Journalists raised questions regarding this at a press briefing held today.
දෙකින් දිගටම කියනවා මහජන පරීක්ෂකවරුන්ගේ සංගමයේ සභාපතිවරයා මේ ඩෙල්ටා ප්‍රභේදය හැමතැනම දැන් පැතිරලා තියෙන්නේ කියලා. ඒ කියන්නේ මොකක්ද කියන්නේ?
ප්‍රභේදය පැතිරලා තියෙන්නේ කියන එකට කොහොමද කියලා මම හිතන්නේ.
I believe that there is not enough evidence to say it for certain. However, we believe that it has spread.
පැතිරලා තියෙන්න ඉඩ තියෙනවා කියන එකට නම් මම එකඟ වෙනවා.
මේ වෙනකොට ඩෙල්ටා ප්‍රභේද වැළඳුණු ඊදෙනෙක් කාගෙන කියනවද?
දැනට ස්ථිරවම තහවුරු කරලා තියෙන්නේ 5 දෙනයි.
As of now, only 5 have been confirmed. That number has not changed. This variant is in circulation. We are implementing the relevant steps required to the fullest.
ඒ නිසා ගත හැකි සියලුම පාලන ක්‍රියාමාර්ග උපරිමයෙන් කරගෙන යනවා.
එතකොට මේ මහජන සෞඛ්‍ය පරීක්ෂකවරු නිලීමත් කරනෝනේ නැවතවතාවක් මේ සංචලන සීමා උඩු කරන සංචලන සීමා දැඩි කරන්න කියලා ඔවුන් කියනෝනේ මේ ඩෙල්ටා ප්‍රභේදයේ පැතිරීමක් මේ වෙනකොට විශාල වශයෙන් රට තුළ ඇති වෙනවා.
මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන්
Security measures required to mitigate this issue are underway. It is not practical to pinpoint where the variant is and who is infected. We must all work together and act responsibly to counter it.
අපි සියලු දෙනාම එක්රැස් වෙලා එකතු වෙලා මේක පැතිරෙන්න වළක්වන්න අවශ්‍ය කටයුතු දැමීමයි වැදගත් වෙන්නේ.
Meanwhile, the Minister of Education says steps will be taken to vaccinate teachers and principals with effect from next week.
අපේ රටේ තිබෙනවා 3000කට ආසන්න පාසල් සංඛ්‍යාවක
There are close to 3,000 schools in this country in which less than 100 male and female students are receiving education. During the meeting with the President yesterday, it was decided that a practical solution for this is timely. The Ministry of Health will implement this process within this month with the approval of the health authorities. In order to do so, the teachers must be inoculated. There are 240,000 teachers employed in this country. His Excellency the President approved the vaccination of teachers during this week. Do your online shopping now.
Sambole.lk.
This is the chairman of George Stewart Health Private Limited, Dilith Jayavira. Recently, this company got an enjoining order from the Colombo High Court against MTV Channels Private Limited to prevent us from reporting on the import of rapid antigen test kits to Sri Lanka. However, today, the Colombo High Court gave a very interesting order on the interim injunction that was sought against MTV Channels Private Limited, again to prevent us from reporting on matters concerning the chairman of George Stewart Health Private Limited, Dilith Jayavira, and officials of that company.
The case filed by George Stewart Health Private Limited against MTV Channel Private Limited was taken up before the Colombo District Judge, Honorable Aruna Alutge, today. Court held that, as averred by the defendant, MTV Channel Private Limited, the interim injunction cannot be maintained against the chairman of George Stewart Health Private Limited, Dilith Jayavira, or its employees, as protection cannot be accorded to them as they have not been made parties to the instant action. Therefore, court further held that such a wide interim injunction cannot be maintained covering the chairman of George Stewart Health Private Limited, Dilith Jayavira, or employees of the company, as they are not parties to this case, and that affording protection to them is outside the scope of court, and in such circumstances, the court rejected the request. Delivering the order, court stressed that the responsibility of journalists and the media to express their views on matters pertaining to public health and their interests, and to make reasonable criticisms based on facts, could not be alienated, as it is a matter of public interest. The judge went on to state that a defamatory statement, especially an implicit defamatory statement, is a highly debatable issue even before a court of law, and it is not an easy task for a court to reach a conclusion. In the order, court also stated that the three main pillars of a democratic state are the executive, the legislature and the judiciary, and it is an accepted norm in society that the fourth pillar is media. Court pointed out that this fact has been clearly set out in Article 14(1)(a) of the Constitution, and therefore, if the interim injunction is granted, as requested by George Stewart Health Private Limited, it's not only restricting the defendant's rights of expression, it also restricts the citizens' right to information. Court ordered MTV Channel Private Limited to refrain from publishing defamatory content only in connection to the import of COVID-19 rapid antigen test kits to the country, its distribution and sale by George Stewart Health Private Limited.
Await for more details on this story. However, moving on with more local news, protests were held in many areas today demanding a solution to the current fertilizer shortage in the country.
The farmers of Uvaparnagam engaged in a protest march towards the Lunuwatta town today. They are in air-conditioned rooms. They do not come here, come to the field and see the hardships the farmers face. We have not received a single cent. These are farmers of Valimada in Uvaparnagama. They claim there is enough fertilizer. These are blatant lies. Do not lie to the people like this. Come to the agrarian centers. See the situation here. The farmlands that provided about 100 kilograms of rice is now only providing 10 to 15 kilos. We are going to come to Colombo.
Meanwhile, leader of the opposition Sajid Premadasa expressed his concerns on the prevailing fertilizer crisis in the country. What are the consequences of the fertilizer crisis? When the farmers are not provided with fertilizer, their harvests decline. When the harvests decline, the food security in our country declines as well. This will result in a deficiency in the supply of food in the country. The government says they will import food from overseas. The reality is that our government does not have enough funds to do so. The ruling faction has led our country into bankruptcy. What will this lead us to? Sri Lanka will end up in a famine state. The government is inhumane. It is insensitive. It is a complete failure. The government is struggling to operate our country. Their actions will end up in the loss of each and every citizen of our nation. Implement a systematic strategy that could be enforced in the years to come. I urge the government to refrain from dragging people of Sri Lanka to the brink of death in an attempt to implement a futile plan.
වසර ගණනාවක් පුරාවටම ක්‍රමිකව ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්නට ඒ සැලසුම හදන්න. නිකරුණේ මේ රටේ ජනතාව මරණ මංචකයට ඇද දමන්න එපයි කියලා මම මේ ආණ්ඩුවෙන් ඉල්ලීමක් කරනවා.
State Minister of Money and Capital Markets Ajit Niwad Cabral explained the government plans to emerge victorious from the prevailing economic crisis in the country. Samaga Janawalawege MP Dr. Harsha De Silva also spoke about the government's management of the current economic situation.
Is the country in an economic crisis? This is being said from a political viewpoint. There are certain problems. We must accept that. It is a problem that is highlighted every time. Has the solution ever been told? Can a grace period be obtained after having discussions with the IMF? There is a certain faction who try their very best to take the country before the IMF. They are aware of what will happen then. They went through that experience as well. After going to the IMF, they had to face many economic influences. They say these things with the idea that it might happen to us as well. We have other options. If there is a better alternative than what we proposed, by all means choose that if that can help the country to prosper. The agreement with the IMF was signed in October 2019 when Ranjit Siambalapitiya was the acting Minister of Finance and Ajit Niwad Cabral was the Governor of the Central Bank. There is no point in blaming the IMF. We must do what it takes to solve the problems we face. We believe that we can overcome the challenge we are facing. We will get there. I am of the stance that the health sector must do what they do. However, we must allow the tourism sector to bloom. Singapore has said that they will make COVID-19 into a common cold. The US is also on the same path. It is understandable that the country cannot go forward while being placed under lockdown. We must get there. Just because Singapore did so, it is not suitable to open the economy with the motive of development. Despite COVID-19, 40% of the population in Singapore have been given both the doses. Not even 5% of the population in Sri Lanka have been given both the doses of the vaccine. We must be able to administer the vaccine among the public more efficiently. Maybe then we might be able to open the nation much like Singapore. Will we lose the GSP Plus facility? They gave a concession to 9 countries. This facility is not given to every nation. There are many conditions that are applied with GSP Plus concession. They are not economical conditions. The conditions include how a nation should behave, the policies they should follow, and human rights affairs. Exports of the country do not depend on the GDP Plus status. In order to obtain this facility in 2017, we agreed to the 30/1 resolution. We urged for the GSP Plus and adhered to the conditions of the resolution. We imprisoned our war veterans. LTT cadres were released. We must not let these foreign influences interfere in our sovereignty. We must face these challenges right now. As a government, we decided not to give in to certain forces. That is a political decision.
In one of our headline-making stories, the Excise Department has decided to permit WM Mendes and Company Limited, a company owned by Perpetual Group owner Arjun Aloysius, to resume operations. Excise Department spokesperson Kapila Kumar Singh has said that the permission was granted subjected to strict conditions. In 2018, the company's liquor licenses were revoked for failing to pay the government taxes. WM Mendes and Company Limited was allowed to recommence operations based on an agreement reached with the Excise Department to settle the due taxes with delay charges within a certain time period. WM Mendes and Company Limited is one of the oldest players in Sri Lanka's liquor industry and was issued 3 licenses by the Excise Department for 2 production plants and a distillery in Morogolla and Velisera. In news overseas now, after nearly 20 years, the United States military has left Afghanistan's Bagram Air Base, the epicenter of its war, to remove the Taliban and hunt down the Al-Qaeda perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks.
Foreign media reported the air base was handed over to the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces in its entirety on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to release the information to the media. One of the officials also said the US top commander in Afghanistan, General Austin S. Miller, quote, still retains all the capabilities and authorities to protect the forces, end quote. At its peak, Bagram Air Base saw more than 100,000 US troops pass through its sprawling compound 50 kilometers north of the capital, Kabul. Foreign media reports that the base would be officially handed over to the government at a ceremony tomorrow. The withdrawal from the airbase is the clearest indication that the last of the 2,500 to 3,500 US troops have left Afghanistan or are nearing a departure, months ahead of President Joe Biden's promise that they would be gone by the 11th of September.
The number of COVID-19 deaths in India has moved past the 400,000 mark as the country tries to speed up its vaccination drive.
Experts in India warn that the real number of fatalities might be much higher as deaths are not officially recorded. India is only the third in the world, behind the United States and Brazil, to record more than 400,000 deaths. The country has recorded 30 million cases, second only to the United States. Australia will halve the number of internationals to arrive in the country today as it struggles to contain COVID-19 clusters that purge major cities into lockdown. The country's strict border rules have only allowed Australians and people with exemptions to enter. From the 14th of July, Australia will only accept just over 3,000 people a week, a measure likely to last until next year. Russia registered a record number of daily COVID-19 related deaths today amid a surge in cases across the world's largest country that the authorities blame on the infectious Delta variant. The government's COVID-19 task force said 679 people have died in the last 24 hours, the highest figure confirmed in a single day since the pandemic began. Meanwhile, South Korea's daily COVID-19 caseload has topped 800, the highest number in nearly 6 months, due to a new cluster infection and the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant. Almost 81% of the 765 locally transmitted cases came from the capital, Seoul, and its surrounding regions.
News First, the voice of the people, continue to stand with the general public when it comes to right to information. However, there are those who would not want you to know certain matters. News First, Shalom Benedict joins us again with more details.
News First continued to report on the sequence of events that led to this case being filed at the Colombo High Court and subsequently on how the hearings did proceed. However, there is something interesting, of course, behind the history and the sequence of the events, most especially on how this case was really filed in the Colombo High Court. Here's a look back at what happened.
On the 23rd of November last year, we reported that George Stewart Health Private Limited had obtained an ex parte enjoining order from the Colombo High Court, preventing MTV Channel Private Limited from reporting on the import of antigen test kits to the island. On the 26th of November last year, MTV Channel Private Limited responded to the letter of demand of George Stewart Private Limited through attorney-at-law G.G. Arulpragasam. In their response, MTV Channel counterclaimed 20 billion rupees for damages caused to their network. This case was taken up in the judge's chambers on the 7th of December last year. Submissions were made in court on how the plaintiff had obtained an enjoining order from the Colombo High Court against MTV Channel Private Limited, even before serving a letter of demand. MTV Channel Private Limited filed a cross-claim in court against George Stewart Health Private Limited on the 18th of December 2020. The cross-claim was set at 20 billion rupees. This was when the case was called up before Colombo Additional District Judge Chaturika De Silva. The district judge on that day informed that this case must be taken up only before the Honourable Judge Rashantha Godabella of District Court No. 1. Therefore, on the 8th of January this year, the case was taken up before District Judge Rashantha Godabella. The request made by George Stewart Health to transfer the case to Colombo Additional District Judge Sandun Vithana was met with strong opposition from President's Counsel Udita Igalaheva, appearing on behalf of MTV Channel Private Limited. He pointed out that parties should not select the bench to suit their wishes and informed court that the practice of permitting parties to select judges is a perverse practice that affects the independence of the judiciary. Having heard submissions by both counsel on the 8th of January, the court made an order that when one party has made a request to transfer the case to another court, it is not correct for the judge to hear the case, stating that one party could allege bias against the judge. Purely for that reason, the learned judge ordered that the case be transferred to Additional District Judge Sandun Vithana. Moments after, the case was taken up before Additional District Judge Sandun Vithana, and counsel appearing on behalf of MTV Channel Private Limited objected to this. Accordingly, the Additional District Judge postponed the case to the 13th of January 2021. When the matter was called up again on the 13th of January, the request made by George Stewart Health Private Limited to transfer the case to Court No. 6 was rejected by the Additional District Court Judge. Considering the submissions, Additional District Judge Sandun Vithana made an order that the case will not be taken up in Court No. 6 and further ordered that the case will be transferred back to Court No. 1. Therefore, the case was taken up before District Judge Rashantha Godabella in Court No. 1 on the very same day.
There are two very important questions that must be answered. The first being, why do we continue to report on these matters? And the second being, why would certain individuals not want us to report on these incidents? The answer to the first is these matters are in the public interest. The money that is being used to make these purchases for these transactions are public funds, and the people have a right to know. We are standing up for that right. The answer to the second question, why would certain individuals not want these matters to go out into the public domain? Well, that question needs to be posed to the individuals who are doing. The general public of this country are free to come up with their own conclusions and inferences based on the information that is available in the public domain on how certain influential individuals in this country affect the decisions made by our leaders on behalf of both you and I. One thing, of course, is very, very clear. These individuals are all friends, and as such, this highlights the importance of the general public knowing about what is really going on in our country. And we do not stand to make any private gains by reporting on these matters to the general public. No, we don't. But we will continue to stand for the rights of the general public. And it is the people's right to know. It is the people's right to make an informed decision. And it is definitely the people's right to decide on the future of this country.
Who is Dilith Jayavira? In addition to being the major shareholder in several companies, he also serves as the chairman of numerous private and publicly listed corporations. In addition to his business ventures, he is also a member of not one, but two presidential task forces. Touted as a visionary businessman. The most recent incident highlighting Jayavira's business vision is the fate he had planned for Devi Balika Vidyalaya in Colombo. What motivated the attempt to merge Devi Balika Vidyalaya and Vijayarama Mahavidyalaya in Nugegoda? Was it to exploit the resources of the prominently located school in Colombo for commercial purposes? On the 28th of February this year, accompanied by a member of parliament, Jayavira literally broke into Vijayarama Mahavidyalaya in Nugegoda. Whilst there may be some who don't consider forcefully entering public property an offence, undoubtedly the people find such actions despicable. Jayavira's name has also been involved in several infamous trades on the Colombo Stock Exchange. In many of these trades involving pumping and dumping or artificially inflating share prices to then make massive profits by unloading those shares, it was the general public, retail investors and EPF members who bore the brunt of these dubious shenanigans being played out in the stock exchange. The public may recall a time when the share price of Lanka Hospitals PLC miraculously increased almost overnight from 28 rupees to 64 rupees, following which it was sold to an Indian company. The Police Financial Crimes Investigations Division questioned Jayavira on these trades on several occasions. Whilst the FCID was dissolved following the election of the new government, the fate of the files and documents pertaining to these investigations are not known. Then there was the skullduggery involving Reef Colombo PLC, as articulated by the then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe in Parliament on the 17th of March 2015, which has been recorded in the Hansard. The initial public offering for Reef Colombo PLC was conducted in 2012. The share price stood at 20 rupees before tumbling to near worthlessness. The wealth of helpless members of the public and retail investors was accumulated for purported star-class hotel projects on the coast of Kalpitia and Pasikuda. These poor investors lost not only their promised profits, but all of the money they had invested. Whilst these hotel projects were later vested under a different company, a cursory perusal of the heads of these companies from CSE documentation provides a key insight into the business acumen and vision of Dilip Jayavira. Whilst pump and dump barbarians ran amok in the CSE, reputed individuals like Indrani Sugatadasa and Tilak Karunaratna, who sought to put a stop to the unethical and illegal activity, were instead forced out of their positions as heads of the Security and Exchange Commission. Coincidentally, the individual who succeeded them at the SEC also happened to be a key member of the boardrooms in the companies being traded by Jayavira. You might be able to guess who this particular individual is by his now infamous Varakan statement. He currently holds a leading position in the urban development sector. Unfortunately, these dubious networks and unethical practices are just the tip of the iceberg. Despite numerous complaints over the exploitation of the public and the abuse of trust involving these dubious business practices, there appears to have been zero progress in investigations, let alone punitive action. Jayavira is now a member of the Presidential Task Force to discover and protect archaeological sites in the Eastern Province, and is also a member of the Presidential Commission appointed to promote a green Sri Lanka by tackling climate change and promoting renewable energy and organic fertilizer. If one takes a glance at Jayavira's ventures and his official appointments, one would be able to make a sordid connection. Sri Lanka can boast of many local entrepreneurs who have gone on to become global captains of industry on their own steam as a result of their hard work, vision, integrity, and commitment. These individuals did not embezzle the people's wealth. Shouldn't the Inland Revenue Department be investigating income sources of individuals with blatantly suspicious sources of wealth? What has been exposed here is simply the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot more that can be exposed to the public. This is why it is incredibly unwise of Jayavira to throw stones from within a glass house. One must remember that one cannot eternally depend on one's buddies and cronies and deceive the people. The decision of the Colombo District Court today has once again reinforced public trust in the independent judiciary. The enemies of freedom and democracy would do well to remember this.
The responsibility of journalists and the media to express their views on matters pertaining to public health and to make reasonable criticisms based on fact could not be alienated, as it is a matter of public interest. Colombo District Court Judge Aruna Alutke.
And that's a wrap of this edition of Primetime News. For the Newsfirst team, I'm Azra Hassan with our sign language interpreter Tharwa Gabriel joining us via Zoom. Thank you very much for joining. Take care always and good night.